Namaskar, I'm Ashok Vyas and I'm sitting here at Arunachal Ashram, Jamaica, New York. And I have the pleasure of welcoming for this conversation to someone whose name I might not pronounce it correctly, but I would say Kristen. Was that right?
Kirsten, you're very close.
Kristen. One more time.
Kirsten.
So, you tried? Kristen? uh, how easy and difficult, funny and important it is even to pronounce one name correctly. And when we want to think about how to find the correct connection with our life, that takes us to creativity and then gradually towards spirituality. Am I right in saying that?
That sounds about right.
Okay, so with one right in my pocket, uh, when I'm talking to you, I'm aware that you are a freelancer, so you love free spirit in some way, and you want to lead your life the way you want to, and you are also a web designer. Talk to me about your formative years in terms of what were your aspirations, what you wanted to be.
Hmm. Well, if you want to go way far back, there was a time when I wanted to be a veterinarian, but computers came along when I was about 10, and it was a lot tidier and neater and seemed like a good way of making a living. So I ended up doing the practical, clean and sensible thing and getting a couple of degrees in computer science. I worked in New York for a while, worked in a web agency at the peak of the dot com boom, and eventually moved out to Vancouver, Canada, and started freelancing there. Worked at the university, and I've been like freelance and contract ever since. I do love the freedom of it and the having the autonomy, being able to set my schedule. I can bring my work wherever I travel, which is incredibly freeing. The downside is I have to bring my work wherever I travel. I kind of need to be aware if a client's website is down or something is urgent and needs to be fixed. So there's a little part of me that's always on. And so that does lead into taking more of an interest in spirituality and starting to wonder after a while why you're doing all of this.
Man, you're so good in sharing this journey where most of us reach to this question, why am I doing all this? So, before we move to this question, let us talk a little bit more about what you have been doing and let us compare your experience of having been a part of New York scene and then now in Vancouver. What is the difference work wise?
Oh, very, very different. I went to graduate school at SUNY Stony Brook and then, like I said, worked in two different places, both in Manhattan and on Long Island for the next few years. And part of the reason I wanted to move out west, besides that I had some family there, is there's a bit more of an emphasis on the West Coast on quality of life, on having a day that ends at a normal time where you can kind of go off and do something else in your evening. And when I was in New York, I was commuting an hour and a half to get into the city, working about a 10-hour day, and then an hour and a half back again. And it was such a grind that I wasn't living, and I wasn't experiencing anything besides just work and the things surrounding work. It was a little better when I took a job on Long Island, but there was still people were so driven and constantly about the next thing, and I sort of had this vague sense there must be something else to do with your life besides this. And of course, that's not to say all of New York is like that, but that was the experience, and that was a lot of the frustration was just that sort of the sense that your quality of life would come later and not that it was necessarily going to be happening now.
Okay, I would say Christine. I might pronounce her name incorrectly.
You can keep pronouncing it incorrectly. I have pronounced pronounced many, many names incorrectly in my life, and I'm sure I'll continue to do so.
So the point is, the way you described your experience of your work life here in New York, and then you also said that you felt there should be better quality of life. So there is some idea of life that you have, and most of us have, I would say, but we forget it. We think that this grind, which you mentioned, working 10 hours, commuting 4 hours or whatever, and then you feel that life would happen sometimes later, and that's how most of us are tuned to, accustomed to, or conditioned to think. So when you start realizing that there is more to life, how that makes you feel? Probably there is more joy, more sense of freedom, and then you also question, am I abnormal or something? So talk to me about that space when you were thinking those things.
Well, I mean, it's a very roundabout thing. It's not like you suddenly explore spirituality and boom, everything is perfect forever. Sometimes once you start looking more at your life and how you're living it, you start noticing the dysfunction. You start noticing, the things you're not feeling, the things you're avoiding, the ways that you fall into habits, the ways that you react to things, and that can be really hard. It's not all love and light and magic, and part of it is accepting that this is what's going on. This is what's happening right now. Is this tension or this uncertainty or this fear or this anger? That's also part of it, and it does get easier once you start accepting it and not fighting what's going on inside you or what your circumstances are. If you don't like your circumstances, you can try to change them. But the internal, oh, things should be different, that sort of feeling is a lot of what is making us suffer on a day-to-day basis.
You articulate experience or condition of many people, which brings them to a sense of frustration, anxiety, stress level increases because you feel that the surrounding that you have or the work conditions that you have is not something that you are enjoying, but you cannot just jump out of it. So there are two sides. One, you try to change if you can the external circumstances. Second, you try to work on the way you react to it or to respond to it. Do you see spirituality or awareness of who you are plays an important role in this dimension?
Let me sit with that for a moment. um, yeah, because we lose sight of we lose sight of who we are in our reactions. So if somebody makes you angry, that anger sort of takes you over, and for a while, that's all that you know. There is a point at which you can have a bit more self-awareness and feel that anger and kind of, whoa, anger is, the anger is happening, but you become more of a witness to the anger than not so much taken over by it. It doesn't mean it's not happening. It's still a physiological process in your body, and chemicals are rushing around in your body that are going to make you feel anger. But it's almost like you don't take it so personally anymore. And okay, this is just a process that's happening within me, and you become more aware that there is this sort of steady stream that is not affected by what comes and goes. That there is still this awareness of something beyond the kind of ebbs and flows and the things you get swept up in day-to-day life.
Wonderful. So I'm talking to Kristen. Kristen. And she hails from Germany originally. Your family came from Germany.
My mother's side of the family is from Germany. I was born in Newfoundland in Canada and grew up there. So on the East Coast, as far east as you can go in North America.
The reason I brought about the reference of Germany or then Canada and America is because whichever part of the world you live in, you are the same in some sense in terms of the way you experience life, the way you try to understand life, and traveling also sometimes help you in being aware of this universality or kind of going beyond a certain pattern of life, which uh, because of its repetitiveness sometimes becomes boring probably. So talk to me about your first love, if I would say love, or when you felt that going to visit different places is something that you would love to do.
I've always been very fortunate in that my parents did take me to Europe and some places when I was young, so I had some other experiences of the world besides my little pocket. Um, it was a long time before I ventured over to the other half of the world. I was seeing someone who really wanted to go to India, and I had been very much afraid to go to India and honestly hadn't had much of an inclination.
Coming from India, I'm tempted to ask you, why were you afraid to go to India? What was the impression that you had?
Um, a lot of fear, a lot of the you know the you hear about the chaos and the craziness of the traffic and the situation for women and everyone I'd ever known who'd been to India got food poisoning. So all that I could think of at the idea at first was all the terrible things that could possibly happen, and it took a while for me to sort of come to my own appreciation for yes, and what might there be that you're missing, that you haven't experienced. Why is it that everybody goes over there and then comes back saying their lives are changed? And I got curious. I got curious enough to overcome.
So now I'm sorry to be interrupting you, but I'm also curious now to go with you in your memory lane. That first visit to India, what places did you visit, and how was it, considering the kind of apprehensions which you were carrying with you?
Well, the first few days were, jet lagged and confused and overwhelmed, but still pretty content. Kind of, wow, this is very amazing, but still looking at it with a very kind of Western analytical bit of a distance, bit of that going on in my brain. And at about the second week, I was miserable. I was sick. I was frustrated by things I didn't understand. Everything was difficult. I couldn't even cross the street. I didn't want to go out by myself alone. And I was like, why am I here? And kind of, well, I could always go home early if I want to, but let's try to see out the end of the month and see how it goes. And the third week was okay.
Which city was that?
Oh, well, we landed in Bangalore and then went a day later to Tiruvannamalai. So,
And how Tiruvannamalai became a part of your itinerary?
that was the main part of the itinerary. I was going back with someone who had been there a number of times before, and it was very important to him. And so I had started to learn about Ramana Maharshi, and was kind of okay. Let's see why this place means so much. What is here? So yeah, about the third week, then was kind of okay. Well, I'll see how it goes. And at about the fourth week, I let go of a lot. I let go of all my ideas of having to understand everything, having to control everything, avoiding things I was afraid of. I just started to, okay, I'm here now. I'm starting to see a bit how this works, but I'm not fighting to understand it or control it. And from that point on, it was more or less smooth sailing. And yeah, and it did kind of light a fire that even once I'd come home from that first trip, I began to learn more about Arunachala and about Ramana Maharshi than I had before the trip. I wanted to understand a bit better what I had experienced and seen, and it sort of I knew I needed some time to sort of process everything before going back again, but it felt like tapping into a whole nother way of living and a whole nother way of being.
Whole another way of being, whole another way of living. These words are quite profound, but only if they make sense to us. So they started making sense to her, and when you were there, probably were not only absorbing the atmosphere, you're probably reading a little bit more about Ramana Maharshi, and anything where you felt that you resonated with what he was saying in terms of your questions about life, about quality of life, and all that.
Um, I think a lot of the reason that I could resonate with his teachings was um, I felt I could trust them and trust his nature. I'm very skeptical by nature. I'd never really been spiritual for most of my life, and I can be very suspicious of anyone telling me kind of this is the way, this is the answer, I have the answer, I can help you. And he doesn't do that at all. You know, he basically is kind of, well, here's an approach, try it, see if it works for you, but you know, there's nothing riding on it. It's, you know, he doesn't really mind if you do or you don't follow. I mean, you get the impression. He just, there's compassion. He cared for people and wanted to help them ease their suffering and find peace. And but he had no ego about it. You know, he didn't need devotees and followers to follow him, and there's sort of a relaxation in that, and it makes it easier for me to go, oh, okay, i trust I trust this, and sort of try it for myself and explore just that compassion and that sense of kindness. You get a real sense of kindness from what I've read about him.
Trust and a sense of kindness, and also no imposition in terms of do this way, do this that way, or and also sense of acceptance the way you are from his side. Now he's one of the few self-enlightened masters, if that is way to refer to him, or as is referred Bhagwan Ramana Maharshi. But there are many things that once you start accepting as a skeptic mind, you may find it strange that you'll have Christine singing Ramana Sadguru as you were humming a little while ago. Let us hear a little bit of that from you.
All right, if you insist.
And allow me to also mention that you have also been a part of a band.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I was in a band and we toured across Canada and in France for a while. So, you know, sitting in the back of the ashram singing along with these big crowds of people going, Ramana Sadguru, Ramana Sadguru, Ramana Sadguru, Rayane. Ramana Sadguru, Ramana Sadguru, Ramana Sadguru, Rayane.
You sing so well, I thought you were going to sing more, but of course, when there are others singing with you.
And I don't know the Tamil, unfortunately, so that's, if I have it in front, I can kind of follow phonetically, but that's all I can do without it.
So, Ramana Sadguru Tiruvannamalai, after your first visit, have you been to India again?
Yes, yeah, I went back the winter of 2017-18 and spent 4.5 months in Tiruvannamalai. Yeah, just got an apartment and settled in, and I brought my work with me, which was a bit of a struggle because I was, you know, trying to go to the ashram every day while also having projects with people back home and having to deal with a time difference there, and being around all the other devotees who were putting all their focus into being at the ashram, and then having to go off on my own and sit alone in an apartment and work on these projects was it was an interesting challenge. But I had really wanted to try to bring a new approach to work and looking at how I sit at my computer and like what pushes me while I'm at my desk. But then at the end of the day, to finish that up and to go and sit with everyone and listen to the singing or walk around the shrine. It was the most amazing thing to be like, this is the end of my workday, is walking around Ramana Maharshi's shrine for as long as I feel the need to. And there's a real community at the ashram. People look after each other, and you meet other travelers, and travelers, especially spiritual travelers, can be very open, and especially people at an ashram like this. There's this warmth and openness that I just found it a very, very good place to be. It wasn't always easy, and
I appreciate your honesty. And honestly, tell me, even coming from India myself, I know there are very few youth or even grown-ups who would spend 4.5 months at a place to just be there and kind of absorb, call that spirituality, or call that a little bit of more awareness about who you are. Or so those 4.5 months, do you feel there was some, I just to keep it brief, sometimes we feel that there is a transition that is happening in me, or the way I connect with myself or with the world, in a subtle way, there is some changes taking place, that kind of stuff. And you hear somebody's experience, how they are realizing something profound just by being there. When you hear them, that also changes the way you connect with life, etc. So on those inner silent corridors of you, anything which you can share?
oh, I mean, you do come back changed. There's no question. You don't always know what it is that's happening. It's something more in retrospect. You look at how you felt about things, the year before versus how you look at things now, or how you might react to the same situation, and you kind of go, wow, that would have totally thrown me for a loop a year ago, and now I'm unfazed by this. You, yeah, I can't imagine going there for that long and not feeling some sort of change, growth, and that's a large purpose of going. And I like to, if I travel, I like to immerse myself and live a life somewhere, not just kind of be a tourist skittering across the surface. And so I'm incredibly grateful that I have the opportunity to do something like that, and to really just sink in and live a totally different life. And it has a feeling of home there now to me, but a completely different kind of home than the home I usually live in, the home I grew up in. I mean, it's just a whole other side of life, but it kind of expands how you perceive yourself, and reduces the limitations that you put on yourself, and what you think you can do and where you think you can go. And, well, I need things to be this way and that way. Well, maybe you actually don't, but you only find that out by pushing a little bit, and maybe pushing a bit beyond your comfort zone, or just having your eyes open to something that just hadn't occurred to you before. And sometimes the best way to do that is to travel and to be away from all the comforts, and have kind of random chaos thrown at you, and see how you roll with it.
You express it so beautifully, and I'm really delighted to be talking to you. As we move towards the concluding part of our conversation, many times you go to a place like this, as we were talking about Ramana Ashram at Tiruvannamalai. You are there, you are feeling different, but when you come back in the same surrounding, and it is very difficult even to recollect sometimes the glimpse which you were having. So in your case, is there anything that you do which helps you sustain something of that kind?
Yeah, it's you do have to kind of make an effort and find things that work for you. So, I mean, keeping up a meditation practice is sort of the obvious first start, and just making sure that that's a priority, that it's but you know, for the first trip when I came back, I then would listen to the Vedas just about every morning, because it reminded me so much of the ashram. And just having that time to check in makes it a little easier not to be so swept up in, you know, once you come back here, and everybody sort of assumes everything is the same as when you left, and you're kind of going to hit the ground running and pick up where you left off and all that, and you're still processing. It's still you're still seeing how things have changed. So you just need to have some of that time every day where you're not busy, where you can just kind of sit with yourself and see where you're at, and try to keep up some of the practices.
And as we conclude this, we'll just have one request. Let us hear Ramana Sadguru from you again.
Ramana Sadguru, Ramana Sadguru, Ramana Sadguru Rayane. Ramana Sadguru, Ramana Sadguru, Ramana Sadguru Rayane.
Lots and lots of claps and lots of good wishes, and thanks to you. Thanks to you for talking to us. So thanking her, and thanking all of you for being with us. This is Ashok Vyas.
Ramana Sadguru, Ramana Sadguru, Ramana Sadguru Rayane. Ramana Sadguru, Ramana Sadguru, Ramana